Everybody, welcome to Two Up the First for today, November the 2nd, 2022. I'm Ryan Ballantyne. Good to have you here with us. We are presented by our friends at French Lake Resort. You can listen to the show on your favorite podcast service. Watch us on golfnewsnet.com and YouTube, as well as Facebook. And you can also listen to us now on Golf News Net Radio on TuneIn, as well. iHeart coming later this week. We've got two stories for you, as the name of the show implies. One is something that's frankly enraging and ridiculous at the same time. And then the other is, frankly, a couple different things put together, but the show's called Two at the First, so we have to have two segments. So the first segment of the show, first story, is something I got in my inbox this morning. I can't remember whether it was sent overnight or what have you, but it was the expansion, a press release expanding the Patrick Reed lawsuit against pretty much anybody and everybody in golf media. And that lawsuit, which he had filed previously, he had filed it in Texas, and then they withdrew it and then refiled it in Northeast Florida, so near Jacksonville. And that lawsuit included, well, it was amended to include, Shane Bacon and Damon Hack. It had Eamon Lynch in it, Brandel Chamblee, Golf Channel, Comcast, were all in that kind of original one. And so they have now expanded this lawsuit. It's just patently ridiculous. Larry Klayman is a very interesting lawyer who is quite litigious and frankly uses the court with frivolous lawsuits to kind of make news for himself. And the only really intriguing part of this is that Patrick Reed is included. But anyhow, so in Jacksonville, the court filing is Reed versus civil action number case 3, whatever, you can find it in Pacer if you are a court nerd like I am. But the co-defendants now in this entire thing are the PGA Tour, Comcast and Golf Channel, Brandel Chamblee, Damon Hack, Shane Bacon for some reason, Eamon Lynch, Golf Week, Gannett, which owns Golf Week, and Shane Ryan, Hatchet, I don't even know who Hatchet is. They added the New York Post, Fox Sports, which we'll come back to that in a second, Doug Ferguson of the Associated Press, and the Associated Press. And the filing is for defamation and injurious falsehood and tortious interference. This is the most ridiculous thing in the world, that Patrick Reed is suing all of these different media bodies. And at this point, I think the request for damages is somewhere in the area of like $1 billion. $1 billion, which is unbelievable unto itself. And that's really kind of the point, right? But the idea here is that Reed and his family have suffered tremendously because of the reporting from the likes of Shane Bacon, from Shane Ryan, and from commentary, which is very well protected in the American system, from the other people mentioned here. I mean, Doug Ferguson is about as straight as it comes in terms of reporting down the middle, reporting facts, not doing a whole lot of opining, frankly, in his writing. Now, you might be able to sense what he feels in some of his writing, but he's about as down the middle as it gets at the Associated Press. That's kind of the point. And then to include the New York Post in all this. So the New York Post, they got Mark Cannizzaro, who's a guy I know casually, good guy, and Brian Wacker, who worked for the Tour and then Digest and has moved to the New York Post because they wanted to have him do more broad sports, but he still does golf. So, maybe he doesn't like Wacker, maybe he doesn't like Cannizzaro, probably more Wacker than Cannizzaro, but it's a personal grievance there. And then adding Shane Ryan into it because he wrote Slaying the Tiger, and in that book, Ryan goes into detail about allegations made about him cheating and stealing a putter and his behavior at the University of Georgia and how teammates didn't like him at Augusta State when he was there. All kinds of different stuff. And frankly, Reed has kind of had it in for Shane Ryan for years. And now it's just kind of tacking him onto this lawsuit that's filled with personal grievances. I think one of the most interesting things about the lawsuit is that Reed is suing Fox Sports. Fox Sports is literally the only network, the only major network in this country that would air Live Golf, because ABC is partnered with ESPN. They will not. NBC and CBS are inextricably linked because they're the weekend broadcast partners for the PGA Tour. And, oh, by the way, Golf Channel is owned by the same company that owns NBC. So you have one potential network out of the four major ones in this country that Live could partner with, and one of your players is suing them for defamation. That is beyond ridiculous, beyond stupid. It doesn't make any sense. And so, of course, the natural reaction is from someone like Shane Ryan, who tweeted about the lawsuit. Hey, good morning, everybody. I've been sued for $250 million related to Patrick Reed and this lawsuit. And, he can't comment on it, but that he stands by his reporting. And, of course, the response from so much of us who know this lawsuit is ridiculous and it's probably going to be thrown out of court at first opportunity is, well, we stand with Shane, and also kind of make some jokes. Because really, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, it isn't kind of. It is truly ridiculous what Reed and Klayman are trying to do here. And yet, at the same time, it's a serious thing, right? Because while this lawsuit is frivolous and could get Klayman disbarred or banned from lawsuits in federal court, and it probably should, it's also an attempt to silence media, which is the serious part of this. And none of these people have made any kind of slanderous allegation against Patrick Reed. They've either reported what he said, reported what he did, or reported what he said in response to what he did. And Ryan stands by his long-term reporting, talked to many sources about that. He got grief at the time, including from Golf Channel itself about the reporting, but he stands by it, as he should, and he has the right to defend his reporting, and he has a right to report what he has uncovered. You have guys who write kind of down the middle for publications like the New York Post and, of course, the Associated Press. Shane Bacon's about as straight-laced as it gets. I mean, I know he has opinions, but he is very much a down-the-middle kind of guy. Eamon's obviously outspoken, so is Brandel, but to lump all of these people together into a single lawsuit, basically saying that their commentary has damaged Reed's reputation, and it has damaged his ability to run a business, it has damaged his ability to make money, he's lost sponsorships, all of these different things. Well, the reality is, he kind of did it to himself. And that's not because of the way he treats people, that's because of the stuff that he has actually done related to golf. Whether that was being an accused cheater, whether that was being an accused thief, whether that was being someone that people didn't like and were willing to talk about that publicly. Those are things that are on him, right? Ultimately, your own behavior is the reason for how you are perceived in public. It's not some grand conspiracy to just bring down Patrick Reed. I mean, frankly, it's not worth the time. But if you do it to yourself, it's going to be reported upon. And so, the goal of the lawsuit isn't to win the money. That will never happen. That will never get there. That is not the point. The point is to bully, is to try to intimidate members of the media about talking about someone like Patrick Reed, or frankly any other public figure, in any kind of negative terms whatsoever. And fortunately for everyone involved in this lawsuit, they haven't done what Reed has accused them of doing. But two, we have an American system, at least still today, that very much protects journalists and protects people who write for a living to have opinions, for one. Two, to share their reporting and stand by it. And to three, not feel a sense of intimidation that what they're going to say is going to land them in court in a lawsuit like this. But at the same time, you have Larry Klayman saying, as part of this press release, which reads completely absurd, but the press release quotes Klayman as saying, quote, "Let it be known that anyone who emulates Shane Ryan and the other defendants in these two lawsuits in order to make a cheap profit and harm Mr. Reed, his family, and colleagues will be held accountable under the letter of the law. That's the whole point of this. This is intimidation. That is the point. It isn't winning the money. The money's never going to happen. This thing's going to get just thrown out really quickly, because the problem with a defamation lawsuit, and I think we've talked about this maybe on Twitter or something in the past, but the problem with a defamation lawsuit is that opens up Patrick Reed and, frankly, Larry Klayman to discovery. And what happens in discovery in a defamation lawsuit is anybody that's ever disliked you and anything you've ever done to wrong anybody comes out, because everybody who doesn't like you gets to talk about you in open terms in open court. They can be deposed to talk about that, and they're probably willing to do so. So that means all of the stuff Patrick Reed doesn't want people to know can become public information. Then you can depose Reed, and then if he's got to tell the truth. Otherwise, that doesn't work in his favor. So this is a ridiculous lawsuit on so many different levels, and yet still it's a serious one because of the intended point of this, which is to try to silence criticism of Patrick Reed. And I thought Morrison of the Fried Egg really said the right thing here and was pretty funny about it on Twitter today, and said, and I said a response to him as well, but basically said, frankly, I'm growing suspicious of all golf media members, including myself, who haven't been sued by Patrick Reed. And I said to him, if you're not slandering and libeling, just how committed are you to this job? And that's kind of the reality of it, is that Reed is trying to pick people to pick on. Pick people he maybe has a personal grievance against and try to turn that into a lawsuit based on a twisting of their words and reporting. Because if you've read the original lawsuit, and I have a really fun Twitter live thread about it from months ago when he first recorded it, or recorded the first lawsuit, then it just reads like somebody whose ego is not in check and doesn't understand that you are very much inviting criticism when you behave the way that Patrick Reed does in public as a professional. That it's just bound to happen. And so the attempt to try to paint this as some grand conspiracy to affect Patrick Reed in his life is downright ridiculous. And it should be spoken out against. It will be spoken out against on this show, any platform that I have. Happy to make fun of it. It deserves being made fun of. It really does. And Reed only kind of brings this stuff on himself. So it's going to be exciting to kind of see how far he tries to take this lawsuit because of all the implications of a defamation lawsuit. But also, I fully expect there to be a countersuit, and there should be a countersuit against Reed and Klayman, both as co-defendants, in part because they're trying to use the court system to silence First Amendment rights. That is a, frankly, unfair use of the courts, and there are court systems and checks in place to kind of make sure that doesn't happen, right? But also, you're trying to use the court as effectively a marketing tool and also a silencing tool. You're trying to get people to not speak their views about Reed, but also share information they may have about Reed that may be less than flattering about him. So I would not be surprised if there is a countersuit from at least some of the people involved in these two suits against Reed and Klayman. And they wouldn't sue for the same ridiculous amount, but they could sue for damages. And ultimately, once the two lawsuits filed against these people get thrown out, they're going to have to pay the legal fees for those folks. They're all of their attorneys, which is a lot of money, by the way. Lawyers aren't cheap. But then they're also going to lose the countersuit. And then once they lose the countersuit, not only do they pay the legal fees for that too, then they pay damages. I mean, you're getting not quite to Alex Jones territory in terms of his denialism and just awful behavior about Sandy Hook and the victims of Sandy Hook. But further than that you're basically going to set a standard whereby this lawsuit can't happen again, because you're going to lose millions of dollars not only in legal fees, but you're going to lose even more for trying to defame people through the court system. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we'll keep paying attention to it from that standpoint, not because there's any merit to it whatsoever, but because this is kind of an important precedent-setting thing, even though it is absolutely ridiculous and farcical that it even exists in the first place. So that's kind of the first story of this show, and frankly, predominant nature of the show. So a couple other things to get to today. Once an interesting kind of caveat carve out here in the new elevated events function for the PGA Tour. They have announced or shared that there are players who are going to be in this group of top players that have all agreed to play in these elevated events and the majors and all that stuff together. They're going to be allowed one exemption out for these events next year. So you'll have to play in 16 of the 17 events, basically. And of those events, you're going to get one to walk out on for whatever reason. And consider it maybe the Jon Rahm rule, in part because you're going to want to play some events on the DP World Tour schedule to maintain membership. So that may mean sometimes going over there and playing to maintain the membership, earn points, make sure you're on the team, all that stuff. So that's an important carve out. I think that's the right carve out for the PGA Tour. Frankly, you should be able to probably skip 2, if we're being honest. But 1 is fine, I guess, to get the job done, because there's not a ton of conflict between the events that guys like Jon Rahm and Rory McIlroy will play to maintain their membership, or that they want to participate because it's their national open, for example. The Spanish Open is after the PGA Tour season concludes. So that works for Rahm, that's fine. And then you also have Rory McIlroy, who wanted to play in the Irish Open, but it didn't all work out this year. But the Irish Open is now moving to after the FedEx Cup season, so McIlroy basically can play. And it'll be an improved date for him and Seamus Power and Shane Lowry and some of the other Irish players who would want to patronize the tournament, but they're in the PGA Tour, throes of the PGA Tour season, and it kind of gets really difficult to do so. So you're going to see, I think, some juggling of the DP World Tour schedule to try to accommodate this to a degree if you have a star player or a highly ranked set of players that would want to compete but just can't because of the PGA Tour schedule. I think we're going to see some shuffling of that to a degree. I think we will see some more shuffling of the DP World Tour schedule to try to backload the schedule a little bit for these top players and give them an opportunity to want to compete, even though it's the off season for them. Just give them a couple here and there. Maybe it's a National Open, the DP World Tour Championship in Dubai to conclude that some additional money there. But at the same time, you've also got these guys who want to patronize the DP World Tour, but they also want to let the DP World Tour just work itself out through a whole season. So I'm curious to see how many players like a Rahm, like a McIlroy, even like a Morikawa, who's technically a member, will they come play the DP World Tour Championship in droves this year? Or will they, because they didn't play it so much this year, just kind of let the players have patronized throughout the year? The Thriston Lawrences, the Jordan Smiths, those types of guys will get the spotlight and not necessarily have to compete as much with those top 20, top 25 players who sometimes make their way into this event or into the final events of the season. I think that's something to keep an eye on, how the DP World Tour responds to the reality of the new PGA Tour schedule from calendar 23 moving forward. They've got these elevated events, they've got this portion of the year to themselves, and that's just the reality of it. But how do you attract some of those players in the fall to come play 1 or 2 of your events? And also keeping in mind the possibility still dangling out there that someday there's going to be some kind of elite series, short series, whatever that is from the PGA Tour that goes into global markets instead of the American market, the domestic market, and rewards top players that way. So there's a number of things to keep in mind about all of that, but that I think is a smart move, at least from the tour, to say, hey, look, we've got to throw a bone to our top players who are from Europe and want to play in the Ryder Cup. They need to have DP World Tour membership. Sometimes they're going to need to be able to go over there and play, and that's going to sometimes conflict with these big purse events, these $20 million tournaments, and the majors and the WGCs and the players aren't going to get skipped. But the other events, those other elevated events, those 4 that are going to rotate year to year, may not always work. So you got to be able to give the leeway to say, hey, I can't play in that one this year, but I'll come back next year to a different one. So a good move from the PGA Tour. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly, and this is really just a humor thing, this notion of free agency in LIV. So there's an ESPN piece, Mark Schlabach, I think, is the reporter, and he wrote a big, long, 3,000 word story, whatever, about the first year of LIV and where it's going and all, then throws in kind of at the end, there's going to be movement in these teams in LIV, and that Taylor Gooch is out of the Four Aces. Taylor Gooch, who likened the atmosphere of okay attended event in Portland to the Ryder Cup, which he never did, is now been the beneficiary all year long of being on Dustin Johnson's team, because Dustin Johnson's the MVP of LIV, and has made Taylor Gooch tons and tons of money. And now Taylor Gooch is going to be kicked off the team. He's off the Four Aces apparently, which means Pat Perez, of all people, gets to stay. The least likely to contribute gets to stay. And they're bringing in Peter Uihlein from Brooks Koepka's team, and they're going to move Gooch to Bubba Watson's team, which didn't do very well. So I just think that's kind of funny that Taylor Gooch, of the four people on that team, Reed and Gooch and Perez, because obviously Dustin Johnson's not going anywhere. Of the three people that you could have gotten rid of, you got rid of Taylor Gooch, the guy that was kind of the epicenter of some of the initial blowback to LIV. And you didn't go after the guy that's suing your potential TV partner, and you didn't go after the guy that's one of the worst performers in the league. Hey, free agency. But the notion that there's free agency in golf is kind of a ridiculous idea, because there's no contracts being signed to play on one team or another with any kind of financial transaction, as far as we know. And I think we would know if there was one, because obviously there's a lot of money related to LIV, and LIV wants you to know there's a lot of money related to LIV. So the idea of players switching teams, hey, that happens. That is just kind of playground sports. But that there is no real system for it. There's no system of controls around it, or contracts, or financial incentive or disincentive to do otherwise. Kind of suggests there's really, free agency is not what free agency in this usage doesn't make sense. So we'll keep an eye on it, I guess, just like all things golf, as we always do on this show. But wanted to kind of bring it to you because I thought it was kind of funny. Let's go do it for us today on 2 at the First. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate it. If you can give the show a follow on your favorite podcast service, that would be greatly appreciated. Or just follow on YouTube at Golf News Net. You can find us there as well. That's also very much appreciated. Otherwise, we will talk to you tomorrow on another edition of 2 Off the First. Have a good one, everybody.